Welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm so excited that you're joining us today. We are going to have a fascinating conversation as usual as we learn from people all around the world at all ages and stages of life. Stay tuned as we shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort.
Here we go. What you think about, you will bring about the mental change. We will.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome back to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm thrilled that you can join us today. We are going to be talking about making every day fun day when dealing with dementia and caregiving, and so you're going to want to tune in. But before I introduce our guest, I always want to do a couple of quick shout outs. So one is a big, huge thank you to the Mark Arneson Band for allowing us to use their song Clarion Call. You can download that on any of your favorite music platforms to show your support for that group. They are absolutely fantastic. And for those of you that are new to our show, Alzheimer Speaks is about sound information, not just sound bites. We want to have a real conversation. So we chat for about an hour here with our guests so that we can go in depth to really learn the details behind whatever the project or topic that we're talking about, business, service, or tool. Everyone is welcome here. So maybe, just maybe, you'll be our next guest. Now, if you haven't noticed, we have finally rolled out our new website. Actually, it's the same name, alzheimerspeaks.com, but it's much easier to maneuver. There you'll be able to find free resources all on one page, from tools and tips to different types of videos, to programs and services, or if you're interested in marketing and branding, and even about my mom, the mother behind the mission here. Some of you might not know that my mom lived with dementia for 30 years, and that's actually what got me into this space. Also, I want to give a shout out to Saltbox TV. If you're not familiar with this great new free online streaming service that was designed specifically for seniors, please go check it out. And then also Maud's Ventures still is open. They're giving seed money, $50,000 to $100,000 in 3 different categories for dementia-focused projects. So go to maudsventures.org. And then if you are looking for a support group, I still do Arthur's Memory Cafe, which is sponsored by Arthur Senior Care on the second and fourth Wednesday of each month at 1 o'clock Central Time. And then also I work with Brookdale, North Oaks. We meet the last Wednesday of the month at 10 a.m. Central at the Shoreview Community Center. And that actually has respite for people. So you can come, and you can also bring your loved one with dementia as well. And if you haven't finished your summer plans yet, the Memory Camp still has openings August 15th to the 18th, and you can call them at 715-479-8255, and that is for people with dementia as well as their families. We are going to hear from the Adaptive Equipment and Caregiving Corner, and then I'll be right back to introduce our guest.
I love the footbar walker, and let me tell you why. It is the option for my toolbox that I've been waiting for. Let's be honest, there are some clients who, despite our best rehab efforts, just aren't able to return to performing a sit-to-stand transfer on their own. Now I can offer my caregivers an easier, safer option that doesn't involve hoisting their loved one up from a sitting position. I don't recommend this walker for all of my clients, but I do recommend this walker for those caregivers looking for an easier, safer option with transfers. I would also encourage other therapists to add this walker to their toolbox. It's kind of like having my own mobile parallel bars for the client to pull up on. Whether it's a family caregiver at home helping a loved one with Parkinson's or dementia, CNAs in a long-term care facility assisting their patients, or therapists adapting to client and caregiver-specific needs, we now have a very safe and effective option to offer in the footbar walker. Check this product out at thefootbarwalker.com. That's it for today from Adaptive Equipment and Caregiving Corner. Have a great day, and don't forget, if you can't do it, adapt it.
Okay, so we are back, and I finally get to introduce you to our guest. we have Dr. Linda Ganzenmuller with us, who is a psychologist whose practice focuses on senior citizens, their families, and caregivers. And she's done that for more than 12 years now. Linda also started a series of books and presentations designed to help families work together to build their own personal best plan for handling difficult situations. And we know families have those many times. So today we're going to also focus on her book, Every Day is Funday with Grandma Stella. So we have a lot to learn. So sit back and listen and enjoy. Well, Linda, I am so excited to have you on the show today. You're doing some really cool things. And before I get into my line of questions, I always like to ask all my guests if they've been personally touched by dementia in their own family or circle of friends.
Well, for me, my experience with dementia is mostly professional. In my career as a psychologist, I've spent the last 12 years really working almost exclusively with senior citizens, their families, their caregivers. And so in that amount of time, there have been dozens of people, many, many people who and families who I've dealt with, who have been going through it and who I sort of took the journey with.
Yeah, it's kind of hard not to walk alongside them. It's such a personal thing for people to even speak about. And so I kudos to you, because I really think
Thank you.
more people and more families could be helped by talking to a psychologist, in this process. But there's a little taboo still attached to psychology for some people, not for everybody. Let me ask you that question, just because I brought that up. Have you found that people are pull back a little bit from coming to see you and talking about, caregiving and things?
I think that for me, very often the relationship starts with the son or daughter of a person with Alzheimer's calling me up and saying, my dad has finally agreed to talk to somebody about the things that they're going through. And over time, I tend to be more involved with families than I might be if I was, doing counseling with somebody, in their 20s, 30s, 40s. And so I form a relationship with the family. And then as time goes on, they're more likely to come to me with questions and to ask me what's going on, and to ask me what to do. And I also have the opportunity, having done this for so many years and being part of a networking group, to be able to help them if they need help, if they need any kind of professionals to come to the home or to give them some advice, they're able to come to me for that as well.
So when people come to you originally, are they coming for the person diagnosed versus the caregiver then?
Very often that's the way that it goes, but often, really it becomes a job sooner or later where you're dealing with the whole family, right? It's and so that this is a very emotionally charged diagnosis. And because of that, my job, what sets me apart from other professionals who also help with, advice about the practical things and the activities of daily living, my job is to help them out with the emotions that go hand in hand with the diagnosis. And, one of the very difficult things about the diagnosis of dementia, of Alzheimer's, is that we know from the moment that we get it, what's going to happen. We know that there's no cure. We know how it ends. And so there are a lot of emotions really linked to this diagnosis, and it happens very quickly. And so I very often end up involved with family members who find it very difficult to take on the job of giving care, of being part of a care team for someone living with Alzheimer's.
I know in my experience, I've always found that people want to push the person diagnosed towards the psychologist because it's their problem. And yet, and then after a while, everyone kind of realizes, no, this is all of us here. This is all of our communications. This is affecting all of our thoughts and dreams and perceptions of life, as a whole. And so we all really need that support.
That's a very big part of the problem of giving care, is that caregiving is never even, right? It's never equal. And we have to realize that everybody is involved. Everybody is involved in this. And my hope is always to get the whole family to kind of get together and decide, well, who needs what, who's got what to offer. who's not going to offer, and how do we make the most of the situation, right? Clearing that family conflict, that's a big part of doing psychological work with families dealing with a dementia diagnosis.
Very true, because you hear so often there's kind of one lead or primary person, and then the
Mhm.
others are back there. Like I was primary for my folks. My dad
Mhm.
had brain cancer, my mom had
Yeah,
dementia, and my brothers weren't overly involved by any stretch.
yeah,
And I didn't realize the resentment that I kind of built
yeah.
up over the years. And then I was really trying to get them to, just be like me, step in, come on, it's, help out. And the day I let go of that, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, was such a relief because, I'm not responsible for their journey. I'm responsible for
Mhm.
mine and how I'm going to interact. But that was a long haul. I mean, my mom lived with dementia for 30 years and I learned that way too late in my eyes, with that. So what got you interested in working with the older generation to start?
Well, I was lucky when it came to that. My degree is in school and community psychology, and I always thought that I would be working with gifted children in the
Mhm.
schools, and I could talk about that for hours too. But I did what a lot of school employees do, and that is get a job for the summer. And I was very fortunate that I had my friend Dr. Barbara Kaplan help me get a job in assisted living homes, working with patients with various stages of dementia. And so that's how I got started with that. And being honest, I went for my first day to meet my supervisor and a few patients and to get trained, and I did not like it. I didn't think I would go back for my second day. And sure enough, I did. And I went back for my third and my fourth. And by the end of the second week, I knew that this was the population I wanted to work with. I was really very lucky about that. This good fortune kind of pointed out what should have been really obvious, right? Because I say jokingly, that when I was growing up, I had friends and they liked me, but their parents loved me. And so, and my parents were old enough. They were 40 when I was born. And I'm not giving away any secrets. They tell you they were old enough to be my grandparents. And my grandmother, who I spent summers with, was old enough to be my great grandmother. And so it's a very comfortable place for me to be, with those generations. And I love them and respect them. And I think they're sweet, kind, generous, patriotic, polite people who we have a lot to learn from. It's
I
weird.
agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I was always, when I was really young, I was always just drawn to my elders. I don't know why. I just,
Yeah.
since I was just a small child. And even, dating and stuff, I would date older people. And people were like, well, what's with you? And it's just like, I just don't feel aligned with people my own age, And so it was very, very natural for me. Plus, I had really fascinating elders in my family that were all
Mhm.
different. And that
Really?
shocked me because everyone else's elders kind of fit, they were kind of categorized of what they looked like and what they did. And the women in on my side were all very, very different. And that always fascinated me as well, with that so curious mind.
Their stories can be fascinating. Just, that's another thing that I love is to hear these stories about people who really were around at a time when the world changed.
Yeah.
What great and fascinating stories they have and what contributions they made.
Yeah, I mean, they had to fight for the TV, let alone the color TV, and
Yeah.
all of those types of things, and the
That's right.
wars, and the telephones where there was actually an operator connecting you. And I mean,
Yeah,
kids now look at, and if they do see a payphone on the street, they don't even know what it is.
that's
"Oh,
right.
what,
Yeah.
what is that?" So we do have so much to learn and
Yeah.
respect,
Yeah.
for them. Now, can you dive in a little bit deeper as to your role as a psychologist? So if somebody, says, hey, we've got an appointment, um, what happens? Is there like a pre-screening that's done before
Mm.
the appointment, or is there kind of a format? Because I know a lot of people, when they talk about going to a psychologist, again, there can be some stigma. Some families, there's not that, but for a lot of
Mhm.
families, there's still a lot of stigma out there. So
Yeah.
what could they expect?
Well, once they come to me, like I said, typically speaking, because my patients are older and a lot of people will do research online, right? That tends to be the people in their 40s, 50s, 60s who are doing the research, and they reach out to me first. And either they'll say, I'm dealing with my mom who has X, Y, or Z, and, I really need some help coping with that. Or my mother is struggling, because she has this diagnosis, or my dad has this diagnosis. And so we meet. And sometimes I meet with the parent and the person who called, because sometimes they're just more comfortable that way. But it's really up to the person who will be the patient to decide what's going to make them comfortable. And I tell them all the time, the first meeting, maybe the second meeting, maybe into the third meeting, that's the time where it's up to me to decide, am I the right person for you, and for you to decide if I'm the right person for you, and do you feel comfortable with me? Is it okay to answer these questions? Do you feel okay talking to me? And who in your family can I talk to as well? Because like I said, it really does become a family situation, particularly with a diagnosis of dementia. And so typically the first session, there will be questions that I have to ask everybody. And then I give them time at the end to just talk to me about whatever they want to talk about. And that's usually when they decide, yes, this is something that I really want to do, or no, it's not something I'm really comfortable with.
Okay. And how long is a typical session?
Typically speaking, certainly the first session is an hour. Other sessions are 45 minutes. They can run an hour, but particularly, if somebody maybe has a little trouble paying attention or focusing, we can go as short as a half an hour. A typical session is 45 minutes.
Okay.
To answer that question. And again, it depends on whether family's involved.
Okay. So for a person, let's say a person is coming and just newly diagnosed, and, and they're struggling with, I can only imagine all the emotions flipping and flopping in their head with what's going to happen to their life. Do you talk about emotions? Do you talk about coping techniques for them, and what is normal and what is not, in terms of strategies to help them once they walk out of your office?
Well, when I meet with them at first, the time to really talk about strategies is earlier on, when they really have something to say and when they can be involved in their own care and in predetermining what's going to happen in the future. And very often that's what we talk about. A lot of what I address when I'm speaking with them, though, is also, as you said, the anxiety of dealing with what's going to happen. And most often that worry is, what will my family do? What will my family do with me? Will they be able to take care of me? And at that point, I find it very helpful to involve the family if the patient is willing to do that, because I feel that they get the most comfort from hearing from the other person, from the daughter, from the son, from the husband or the wife. This is what, we hope to do. What do you hope that we will do? And, I like to give them some good resources so that they can understand what the journey will be like in the future, and who is out there to help.
Okay. So when it comes to preparing for the journey, do you ever refer people to elder attorneys at all, in terms of, because I know sometimes getting their estate and stuff in order, and is there going to be enough money, and who legally is going to be able to represent them? Is that something that you refer people to, or?
I certainly do. I'm very fortunate that I am on the board of the Senior Umbrella Network of Suffolk County, and that is made up of different people who all work for the benefit of seniors, and in all different aspects. And certainly there are many attorneys. There are people who will install bars in your shower. There are people who work in assisted living, in daycare, in all different aspects of the care that senior citizens will need, particularly, not necessarily only with a dementia diagnosis, but as they get older and as their diseases progress. And so, yes, there are many Long Island attorneys, many who will help with planning the estates, right? And many who will have free webinars about what to do, particularly with regard to a Medicaid trust, which is something that's too complicated for me to understand, but something that many people with a lot of money and many people with not so much money choose to do in order to be able to do, protect their assets and even to determine which assisted livings they may be able to live in, because we are seeing more and more being cared for, more and more rooms being open to people that are paid for by Medicaid.
Yep. Wonderful.
Mhm.
Well, I think that gives people such a relief to know that you're connected to different
Mhm.
support systems too. Yeah, I found that in my real estate days, when you could
Yeah.
refer people, they just breathed easier,
Oh, for
and
sure.
felt more comfortable.
No, I feel that one of the most important things that I can do is refer people to somebody who I know and who I trust. I think it's one of the most important jobs that I have, not just as a psychologist. I think every professional involved with another human being who needs care needs to know, well, okay, who out there is good and who's not, and who is it that you can reach out to.
Mhm. Do you ever get family members that want to come and see you but don't want the rest of the family to know? Let's say maybe mom or dad is meeting with you and then they decide they want to, but
Oh,
and I mean, I know there's HIP and you can't disclose that anyways,
well,
one way or the other. But I was just kind of curious on that, if you could talk
mm,
as a whole, because I think there's just so much that families don't disclose to one another sometimes.
mm. Well, that doesn't typically happen very much. If people want to speak to me, they will typically respect that mom or dad needs to accept that that's going to happen. And I wouldn't do that
Mhm.
anyway.
Mhm.
I don't like to meet with a family member if I'm already caring for another family member, unless it's together.
Mhm.
Um, Simply because you have alliance with one person over another person, and sooner or later you might just slip and forget, did
Mhm.
this person tell me ABC or did that person tell me ABC, and then you slip and you say this thing that was supposed to be said in confidence, thinking that the wrong person told you. And so people tend to be pretty open about wanting to speak to me, and I always insist that um, if there is going to be any connection with me and any other family member, that the patient is both aware of it and okay with it. But we'll refer them out to somebody else for sure.
Okay. Well, and that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense with that. Now you've, worked with seniors, like you said, about 12 years, which is
Yeah.
a long time,
Mhm.
and their families. Now you've written a children's book now.
Yeah.
So how did that come to be? I always find that there's usually, when somebody writes a book, something happens. There's usually a moment that just says, I got to do
Mm.
this.
Oh, well, I certainly had that moment. Um, I was taking a course at ADRC, the Alzheimer's Disease Resource Center here on Long Island, on how to be a good caregiver years
Mhm.
ago. And I don't remember what webinar we saw or what chapter we read or what was said at first, but it just struck me, how do you tell this to a child? How do
Mhm.
you make Alzheimer's okay to a child and tell them, well, grandma loves you, but someday she may not know your name, or grandpa who loves to play with you may not know how to play the game anymore. And I was just struck. I was dumbfounded. I couldn't think about anything else for the rest of the class, for the drive home. And, for a couple of weeks after that, I was thinking about that too. And then it finally at some point occurred to me, hey, you know what? I think kids are better at it than we are. Right. And so I ended up writing a children's book because it allowed me to do a lot of things. Because while on the surface, it looks like a children's book, and it is a children's book. It's fun, it's cute, it's illustrated, it's written for children, but it really is multi-generational. It's a book that provides a lot of information and a lot of suggestions on how to understand something and how to act and how to cope, that is put, first of all, in the vernacular of a child, right? Something that they can understand, because we don't want to keep them in the dark, and we don't want to cry in a separate room and teach them that if you're sad, you're not allowed to be sad. Right. And we don't want to teach them that it's something that we don't talk about, because you want them to be able to talk about it. And so I provided this book for children thinking, well, they need this information. It's an important thing to give to them. But it was also meant to teach the other generations, right? It was very, very intentionally written for an age group that needs to be read to, right? Because parents, given the opportunity to care for themselves or care for their child, are going to care for the child. And given a book for adults or a book for children, they're going to grab this book and read it to the child. And there's good, sound information in here that I think will be very helpful to the parent as well. And by reading this book to the child, it only takes 5 minutes. It's a 5-minute read, they are getting some advice about how to act, how to cope, what to think, how to understand. And so it was my hope that this would be a piece of research, right, of information for all kinds of generations under different circumstances, right? And there's more that I was able to do because it was a children's book, right? I was able to tell it from the perspective of a child, that beautiful, innocent, accepting perspective, of a child who just, if you think about it, there's a reason that children are as accepting as they are. And, in Psychology 101, I remember learning Jean Piaget and the theory of cognitive development, right? We learn that children up to a certain age, 7 or so, I mean, they're new to Earth, right? And they see things all the time that they haven't seen before. And they don't say, oh, that doesn't belong there. They have to accept that this thing exists. Right. And, one day for the first time, they'll see a dog and it's got fur and it's got 4 legs and a tail and it barks. And then someday in the future, this quote unquote dog is going to walk in with its fur and its 4 legs and its tail, and it's going to go meow. And that's going to surprise them, but they're not going to try to get this poor cat to bark, and they're not going to reject the cat or try to fix the cat. They're going to say, oh, look at that, this exists too. And I think that they're in that place where they accept the person who maybe is changing or is maybe different than other grandmas they know. And they just, it's a beautiful thing to be able to see through their eyes, that we can accept them the way they are. I think you said it before, you want to get to that point where you're like, oh, what a relief it is. We're not trying to fix them anymore. We don't have to change them anymore. I don't have to be mad at the people who aren't helping out. We can just accept that this is the diagnosis and move forward from there and make the most of every moment that you do have. That really is the goal.
Yeah, I think kids see caring so clearly. And I think adults make it really, really complicated because we start making our list of everything we have to do. And kids just focus on the relationship and having fun. And so they just adapt. That's just what they do. They just bloom and they adapt. The sun's this way. Okay, we'll lean that way. It's just, it's so cute. So I think they are powerful little leaders and teachers to the world. And yet it's kind of like I have a movie that I show called A Timeless Love, and it kind of it takes people, off kilter a little bit because they're not expecting to learn about dementia in life because they're going to a movie. And I think when someone's reading to a child or a child's reading to them, they really don't expect to learn. And yet it's so fluid and it's so natural. And I think some of the comments that kids can make that are so innocent and so poignant that it just almost slaps an adult in the face going, how did I miss that one? Because they just see things so clearly. Now, one of the things I want to ask you about the book title, because it's every day is Funday with Grandma Stella. How did you come up with the title?
Well, there are a few parts to that title, right? Funday. Right. What was important to me when I was still working in assisted living is that I would sit with my patients, and I think that they were pretty happy to see me, and we would have a nice time together doing some activities. And I would usually spend some time at the end just talking to them. And what I saw far too often was people, aides, family members, going up to someone and really just expecting maybe too much from them. You know, people with no patience or people with the best of intentions, you know, would make mistakes. And very often it was, I thought I told you to be ready at 10. I thought I told you after the show that you had to get done. I thought, and there was just so much emphasis on, you know, how to read the clock, how to read the calendar, which I think was just very, very difficult for families to accept, maybe wasn't going to be an option anymore.
Mhm.
And that's why I address in the book, you know, the kids say, well, mom wants, you know, Grandma Stella to look at the clock and look at the calendar. But for us, every minute is great o'clock and every day is fun day. And that's just the way it is. As long as we're together, none of that stuff matters. And I think that that kind of speaks again to the innocence of children, right? And to their love of their grandparents or the person, you know, who in their life has dementia. Stella, I don't know anybody named Stella, and I don't know anybody named Leo, which is the name of the grandfather in my future books. But they were named in honor of my dad, who my two daughters, Megan and Kayla, were crazy about my father, and my father was crazy about them. And when he passed away, he left them a letter for Megan and Kayla after I died, and it was the most beautiful thing I've ever read in my life. And I'm going to get choked up, but he mentions in the letter the stars and how they should look to the stars and how to know which one is his and what to do once he knows that, and once you know that information, right? And so Stella, like stellar, and Leo, like the astrological sign, are both references to the stars, and both named in honor of my dad, whose name is Jack. So
Oh, that's neat. Well, and
Thank you.
thank you for sharing that about the letter, because I think that those are so
You're welcome.
meaningful too. And there's something simple that people can do, you
Yes.
know, ahead of time to tell people that they care. You know, one of the things you were talking about was, you know, people making comments and kind of the impatience of, you know, hey, it's time to go. I told you so, you know, type stuff.
Yeah.
Is again, as adults, we are so task oriented. And
Yes.
kids don't look at fun and engagement as a task. They just look at it
Mhm.
as fun, you know, and how do we get there, you know? And
Mhm.
even if you got to take a detour, a side road, they're still going to get to that path of fun,
Yeah.
no matter what it is, and they're going to have a good time skipping and hopping, you know, as they do it.
That's
It's
right.
like they just don't miss a beat. I just think they're fascinating to watch, you know, how they engage with people.
We have a lot to learn from
Yeah.
kids.
Now, for your second book, how far along are you with that?
Well, my second book, which isn't named yet,
Mhm.
but it is about losing someone you love when they pass away. In this case, it will be Grandpa Leo.
Mhm.
And I am doing this in conjunction with Camp Good Grief out here on Long Island. They've been incredibly generous, and I just can't believe the depth of all of the things that they do for children who are dealing with the loss of a loved one. And the research is all done. The idea is all in my head, and it's coming soon. I expect to see it within the next few months. Certainly by the end of the year, it's going to be out there.
Oh,
And hopefully
exciting.
Susan Herbst will be able to come back and do some more illustrations for me.
Oh, neat. I love that you're making this series for kids. I think it's so important.
Thank you.
I just, so often I saw families, and I still do, where they leave the kids out
Yeah.
at all different ages, even teenagers who sometimes are watching grandparents and, you know, coming home from school and having to kind of cover a couple hours till the folks come home, don't really know why
That's
or
right.
what's going on. And they are, you know, I used to go into the school and do talks, and they're really devastated about that because they want to help, but they feel like they've been pushed away and almost degraded in terms of what their
Yeah.
stance is in the family. And it really throws them off, you know, in terms of what is my role, or why don't they trust me, you know, to know this and to help. And they're so dang creative, you know, in terms of how they approach things, which I think us as adults really need. You know, we need to get out of that box of this is the way you do it, because we're all
Mhm.
a little bit different. And
Right. Thank you. And I think that it's a primary focus, as it turns out, not only about Alzheimer's and dementia, but as I spoke to people about, as I learned about grief, about grieving
Mhm.
someone who passes, it is so important to be able to talk about it. And,
Mhm.
because otherwise we're just taught, no, don't talk about it. Hide your
Yep.
feelings, don't talk about it. I'm not going to tell you about, and in some ways, again, we can have very good intentions and just want to protect our younger generations from
Mhm.
having this pain. But really that's not what we're doing. We're just making it harder and harder for them to talk about it or to accept the feelings that they have, or
Yeah.
even know what to call those feelings, right?
Yeah, I was lucky. My mom always brought us to the wakes and the funerals, but she would actually get scolded by her friends. They're
Mm,
too young, they shouldn't be here. And in looking back, right or wrong, this is just my own personal thought. People didn't bring their kids because they didn't want to have to answer questions they weren't
yes.
ready to answer.
I
You
think
know,
you're absolutely right about that. I think that's why we keep our children in the dark, because we don't want to have to confront the situation and, upset them, upset ourselves. We really just want to avoid that.
and then it just makes everything spin, out of control, I think even longer. And then you're alone doing it versus if you could do it together and kind of help pull one another up. I just learned so much, even on my mom's deathbed. She was still teaching about death and dying. She was pretty much comatose, but she was coming to me in
Yeah.
dreams. And a few
Oh,
months prior, she told me I wouldn't be there when she died. And I'm like, but I'm that person. I mean, I'm always that person who's sitting
mhm.
bedside with somebody. And she's like, nope, I need you gone. I need to know you're still going to do this work, that we've created. And the rest of them have to be present and they need to be part of the dying process. So like 4 months, I think it was like 4 months later, 3, 4 months later, literally, I have 2 keynotes in Arizona, and so I have to go because I don't have anyone to replace me. And I felt comfortable doing that because I knew that's what my mom wanted. But what I
Mhm.
didn't realize, I had prepared myself to stay in touch by phone, but we ended up FaceTiming and we had these miraculous conversations I had with my not so much conversation with my mom, but I could talk to her, but she couldn't really respond to me. But I could even get my family in line when my older brother was just getting everybody like twisted up. I could crack a joke and put him in his place and cut the ice, over video. And I could guide them to do different things like, get cold washcloths and get swabs and ice chips. I could do all of that by video, but they could physically do it and be
Wow.
part. And it was so beautiful. I mean, I got to take
Yeah.
part in the last rites. I mean, there was nothing. I didn't even miss her taking her last breath. I got to see that. And so
Wow.
she orchestrated, I believe she orchestrated it to a T. But that was just a really important thing to her all of her life, was that people learn to accept, death and birth as equal. This is the
Wow.
cycle that we live in. And I thought she just did it in a
Hmm.
really, really amazing, amazing way.
I've never heard it put that way before. I do think that they have just a tiny little bit of control
Mhm.
sometimes, because what I hear, I would even say more often than not, much more often, most of the time, people will say to me, I was with my husband, my wife, my mother, my father the whole time, and then I left to get a sandwich and they passed, or I had to get a shower, or I thought they were okay, and this is something that I just hear all the time. It's just that small window of time when they're gone is when their loved one passes, and I just can't help but think that there's a reason for that. I don't know if it's too hard for them to leave when you're there. I don't know if they want the circumstance to be just right. Like, I think maybe that's what your mom wanted. I don't know. I don't understand it, but it happens. In my experience, talking to people almost every time.
Mhm. Yeah.
Remarkable.
It really is. I've had some interesting, death experiences where my uncle came to me in a dream, and I thought he was alive and at the end of my bed talking to me. And he had
Mhm,
been dead probably 9 years. And then I woke up like
mhm.
looking for him and he wasn't there. But his wife was dying. And he came to me with his arms wide open, and he said, with this big, beautiful smile and his just twinkling blue eyes, and he said, "You have to go tell Kay it's time, and I'm here and the others are here to bring her." And so I laid in bed kind of thinking, what should I do? And I'm like, well, you better get in the shower and get down to the hospital. So I run down to the hospital, and as I'm walking in the door, the hospice nurse grabs me and says, "Honey, I just want to prepare you. She's not going to respond. She's not going to talk. She's not going to smile. She's not going to open her eyes. She's not going to squeeze your hands, but she will hear everything you have to say. So just say whatever it is." And so I sit down next to my Auntie Kay, and I hold her hand, and I start just yapping about anything and nothing, because I was nervous to tell her this story, because she was really, really Catholic, and I thought she might just look at this as really goofy, you know? And then after like 45 minutes, I ran out of stuff to say, and I'm like, "Okay, Auntie Kay, I'm just going to tell you why I'm here." And then I explained how my uncle looked and what he said. She squeezed my hand, her eyes popped open. She got this big, beautiful smile. She just stared up at the ceiling, and the room just got chilly. And that lasted probably, only 5 or 10 seconds, not very long. And then she closed her eyes, she squeezed my hand, but her smile stayed. And I stayed with her about 20 more minutes and just talked with her. And then I went home, and about an hour later, I got the call that she passed. Wow. And it was such a beautiful experience, but their kids were upset with me that their dad came to me. Why didn't he come to us? And it was almost like kind of a jealousy type thing is what it felt like to me. And I said, because you weren't ready. You couldn't deal with that. And he knew it was her time.
Yeah. And which one would he choose?
Yep.
Which ones would he not? Yeah.
Exactly. And so, it was a few years later, and we talked, they said, "Thank you. That was the right thing to do. You're right. We wouldn't have been able to handle it, because then we would have been grieving him on top of losing Mom." It's interesting, all the unknowns. But I do believe that there's a lot of beauty within that. One of the big lessons I always try to teach people, and I never realized this until my dad died, because I spun when he died. I kept reliving him dying over and over. And when he passed, I had my hand on his chest telling him he could go, and I felt the energy go up my arm, literally. And I kept looping and looping and looping. So I went and I talked to somebody about that. And I finally came to the realization that you can't grieve that deeply, or, feel that sad, whatever words you want to use, without loving that deeply.
That's right.
And that always helps pull me out, going, how lucky was I to have loved that deeply, to hurt this bad, because so many people never, experience that other side. So I think anything that we can do to help explain that to people, I think is just really, really a beautiful thing. And I highly encourage people to go ahead and talk to a psychologist. I mean, you guys are so helpful, can just help balance us, because I think so often people think, am I going crazy? Why are these emotions so strong? Or why can't I control this pattern of whatever it is? I've always been in control. And then people just a lot of times feel lost.
They absolutely do. And depending on the circumstances, but I mean, what you're explaining, right, is very much anxiety. Anxiety makes itself worse. You become anxious, and then you become anxious about the symptoms that you have about anxiety. And the very nature of anxiety is to take things to the worst case scenario as quickly as possible. Right. And so I think it's very important to have an understanding of that's what this is, when you're feeling those moments. And I think that's the answer to a lot of things. A lot of things are really big. Dementia is a really big tower of blocks, right? You want to break it down into small, digestible, understandable pieces. and that's the job of a psychologist. If the psychologist is on your team, well, let me do that. Let me be the one who, I've studied this for years and I've seen it so many times. Let me be the one who says, well, here's a small piece. A small piece of, dementia, a small, one thing that you can do. So, your grandma or mom can't take care of the house anymore. Well, that's okay. Maybe you could look at it differently. She doesn't understand what you're saying anymore. Well, look her in the eyes and speak more slowly, or, these are little bits and pieces of information that you can have and use and take with you to understand. Because once you understand, it's really hard to be angry, with yourself. It's hard to be angry with the other person. And it just helps us to accept better the situation that we've been given.
Exactly. You take away that aloneness, when there's somebody else supporting you. I mean, that's huge. And we've heard so much about the anxiety people have felt through COVID and the social isolation. And a lot of times with grief and loss, people do get socially isolated. They don't want people around them. They don't know what to say. They sometimes can push back at things, and people want to help, and yet we don't always know how to help and stuff. So everyone reacts a little bit differently, to their grief. Some are willing to show it and some aren't. And
that's right.
And in both ways, cause, I'm sure, some friction within the person, no matter what it is, because you're still processing.
That it's very, very important to understand that everybody grieves differently, and you need to accept that. And if you know that the person, your brother, your sister, whoever it is, if you know that that person loved the person who passed, then you need to accept the way that they're grieving. Because otherwise there's so many family fights. This one's not grieving enough. This one cries too much. This one can't stop this or that or the other. And then you end up angry with each other, but no, you need to just accept however they are grieving, be there. You want to be the companion. You want to, as Alan Wolfeld says beautifully in so many of his books, you want to be there as a companion. You want to be there as somebody who can support, not put the person down and not fall apart. Just be there to listen and let them tell their story and honor the person who they miss.
Yeah, that is a real important piece. And it's a difficult thing to do for a lot of people, to get to that acceptance. If everybody is the same, kind of like with dementia, people like, well, they can't have it because, my parent didn't act like that, or my symptoms. I mean, you get these battles, and it's like, gets down to when you've met one person with dementia, you've met one, just like when you've met one human being, you've met one. We all tick a little bit differently. We have different triggers and joys and habits and all kinds of things. Acceptance and patience, I think, are the two biggest pieces that can bring peace to people dealing with dementia or any type of grief.
I agree. Understanding it and accepting it, and just recognizing, like you said, that people are different in how they cope, different in what they do, and just different in personality. And different in going through the stages of dementia too. Some people have these wild fantasies about one thing I hear often is men imagining that they're war heroes, right? That they're saving the ship, and it's okay to just go along with it and accept that that's what they are. Sooner or later, whatever blog you might read or webinar you might go to or article or book or whatever, sooner or later, if the book is about Alzheimer's or dementia, the author will say in their own way, you have to learn to be where they are, right? Yeah. I might say you have to learn to think with a brain that works like theirs, because they're not really going to think with the brain that works like yours, right? You have to come from their place and you have to understand them.
Yep. Yeah. And there's that other saying too, you're never going to win an argument with the person with dementia, because the rationale, and again, it depends on where they are in the progression, because I know in the beginning stages, my mom still trumped me out a few times, in arguments and so, there's those moments of clarity. And, but I think if we focus on joy and believing that it still exists and that our connections are still there and that we're not handing them over to the disease. I think that's
Yes.
probably one of the most devastating things that I hear
Mm.
families do is they
Mhm.
lose hope and they give up their connection because
Yeah,
that's what they've been told through old school information.
that's right. It's easier, right? That's what
Mhm.
other people say. Why would you want to, why would you want to keep going back? Why would you do that to yourself? And yet that's not the way to go, right? And I
Yep.
think Teepa Snow said it very well too. It's not unusual to look up dementia and see a picture of a young, healthy brain compared to a brain after dementia and look at the
Mhm.
comparison, and Teepa mentioned, well, yeah, there's a big difference between brain number one and brain number two, but there is also a lot of years between brain
Yep.
number one and brain number two. And there is still so much left to do. You have to make the most, she says, of what you have, of what is left, and gracefully let go of what's left, of what you
Yep.
don't. And I think that that's just so beautifully said. You don't want to miss those moments, those moments that you have where you could maybe still travel. I mean, we're talking about typically 10 years for you, which is a long time. For you, it was 3 long times,
Mhm.
right? But you have some time still to enjoy things, to get your affairs in order, to fill out these grandma books, like, to fill out these stories and leave your legacies the way that you want to leave your legacy, and just enjoy the moments, give quality to the life.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and we're seeing people live longer too because they're getting
Mhm.
diagnosed younger, and even though they say young
Mhm.
diagnosis, I mean, some with early onset can go faster,
Yeah.
but there's people like my mom, 55, she lived till 86. And the
Mhm.
first 10 years, she was misdiagnosed. He kept saying it was her hormones. And my mom would joke, this ain't my girlfriend's hormones, but we still hear those stories today from people in terms of what's going on. But I personally believe that social engagement and feeling purposeful and accepted allows us to live longer, makes us want to live longer, makes us all want to live longer when we feel connected. And a person with dementia is no different on that.
That's right.
So focusing on those abilities versus the disabilities and the loss, I think people can be really surprised at what somebody's still able to do. Like you mentioned, travel. And, there's groups working on travel. Right now, our Roseville group is working with an international group on getting
Wow.
TSA trained, and there's a sunflower lanyard that the airports are using. And there's lots of there's books written about travel and dementia, and there's travel companions. There's all kinds of different things out there that people are looking at. So don't give up hope. And if you're listening and think of an idea, don't poo-poo it. Go for it. Try it,
Right.
see how to improve the world. I mean, little steps by all of us, make the world a better place. And, pick up Linda's book, I think. And what's the best way for them to get that, Linda? Is it to go to your website or?
You can go to my website. It's also available on Amazon,
Okay.
Walmart, Target, Barnes and Noble.
Okay.
So it's available all over. I would love for you to visit my website, Wise and Worth Listening To, for seniors who I think are wise and worth listening to. And if you have a story to tell, if you have a letter to write to someone, if you want to explain what it's like to get older or maybe have dementia, live with somebody with dementia, or maybe you live through an interesting time in history, please come and contribute to the website. I'd love to give you the opportunity to do what we do all the time, express ourselves online.
I think that's great. And I think there's so many people looking for that opportunity. One of the things I find with a lot of people going through this is they don't realize what a resource they are. If they're living with it, if they're a family caregiver, they just look at, well, I'm a person living with a diagnosis, or I'm a family caregiver, and it's like, you are both a wealth of information. don't
That's
don't
right.
fool yourself, because you're not fooling the rest of us. We know how much knowledge you have. We just need to find more comfortable spaces for them to enter and want to share that, because they are so informative.
They are.
So again, the website is wiseandworthlisteningto.com,
Right.
and you can email Linda at drlinda, GANZ@gmail.com. She is
Right.
also on LinkedIn and on Instagram and Twitter as Dr. spelt out Linda G.
That's
So
right. Yep.
thank you so much, Linda, for spending this time with us today. I think you
Thank you
gave
for
people
having
a
me.
lot of great ideas. One last question, I guess, for you. You mentioned you're in the New York area. If there's somebody in another state, can you help them? Are you licensed in other areas?
I am currently licensed to practice psychology in New York and in Florida, and I'm working on extending that to all the different states. But at this moment, that's not an option for me. But it's coming. It's
Okay.
coming, and I do have webinars that I would love to have people attend. That may be helpful if that's something they're looking for.
And those would be
And the
listed on your site then?
That's right. And I have one coming up on July 10th, More Feeling, Less Thinking, the role of compassion in dementia and Alzheimer's care.
Wonderful. Well, jot that down on the calendar, July 10th. Go to her
Thank you.
site and register for that. Thank you so much, Linda. Really appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure.
And for our listeners, I hope you like, click, and share this episode. There's always so much we can learn. So it's good for us to all pass this to our circles, because there's a lot of people in our own circles that are dealing with dementia
Yeah.
that we don't even know about because they're not comfortable speaking about it. But what I have found is the more information that's out there, the more comfortable they'll feel like accessing it when the time is right for them. So thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.
Bye now.